The tea tastes good today.
Hey, everybody. Get things all lined up here, by golly. The magical green screen. How's everyone doing? It's Saturday, April. Got to get the sounds adjusted. It's April 16th, and we're rolling on. And hey, Scott, glad everyone could come by. Hope you're going to enjoy this. We got some interesting things going on in the football world, news-wise, just two of them. Kyler Murray says he's not going to play unless he gets paid. The Cardinals, sounds like they'd like to put this off. And I think when you see most of the big extensions, and for those just getting in on the fun, there's been kind of a lengthy back and forth over time, starting out with, Murray scrubbing his social media, followed by the Cardinals suggesting, that he's immature, through ESPN's Chris Mortensen, through his agent putting out a notice saying, hey, we want a new deal soon. The Cardinals saying everything's okay, and now clearly not as okay. The latest reporting is he will not play unless he gets a new deal. But he's not in a good position here, doesn't have a ton of leverage. If he doesn't show up for the start of camp, he loses a good chunk of his $5.5 million salary. So sounds like he'd like $40 to $50 million a year. The Cardinals are looking at 30 to 40. So they'll get this figured out. I'll just remind everyone the public portions of negotiations tend to be the more contentious aspects. You'll be surprised to learn. And so there's that. On a more positive note, the Raiders and Derek Carr agreed to a long-term, or at least a 3-year extension, putting Carr in that $40 million a year club, which is probably part of the impetus for Kyler Murray's latest stance. He'd like to join that club as well. It's understandable. Look, everyone wants to make that $40 million a year. You guys do, right? I do. So I'm not going to hold out, though. And neither is our guest this week, good friend of mine and one of the sharpest guys in the world when it comes to the rookies. And he's sharp because he's grinding all the time. You find his work at the rookie scouting portfolio. His name is Matt Waldman. And we'll bring him in now. And hello, Matt. How are you, young man?
Bob, I'm doing just great. It's always awesome when we get a chance to, chop it up about these rookies and football in general.
Yeah, it's a good time. And so one of the things that I tend to do is during football season, I'm watching NFL football, and it's my sole focus. And I don't understand a lot about the college players. And I'm not, have that great understanding of the college game and how offenses have evolved. And clearly they have, based on what we've seen players coming into the league, especially the receivers, tend to get off to a little quicker starts than we've seen in the past. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, but talk about some of the prospects. And if you're not familiar with Matt or his work, you can follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. But what we're going to be basing a lot of our discussion on is his annual tome, the rookie scouting portfolio. For me, it's the I don't want to call it a Bible, but it's how I learn about rookies, right? I mean, I listen to all these guys. We have John Law here on this very site, Football Diehards. By the way, hit the subscribe button here on YouTube and like if you like it, and hit the dislike if you don't. Matt and I both really enjoy the negative feedback. It helps us out. But the rookie scouting portfolio, the rookie scouting portfolio is probably the most in-depth piece of work. And what I like about it is you can roll through, it's bookmarked. It's a big, ginormous PDF, people. Reasonably priced. Again, go to mattwaldmanrsp to find it, .com to find it, and you'll see what I'm saying. But you can kind of go and it's designed so you can look at it in the depth you want to look at it. And by the depth you want to look at it, that can be just from the basic rankings and comparisons, which is my starting point. I love that. I remember Frank Coyle, the old Hindu theory that he had. This guy is like this guy, right? And it's a good way for me to start getting into the rookies. But with Matt's work, you can go in and see all of his work, and it's all there, from the grades, the film study, all the things, all the notes that you would need, and way beyond. And after the draft, he will come out with a post-draft RSP, and then he also has a dynasty component. You'll find his work, as you have annually, in the Fantasy Football Pro Forecast magazine, which we are working on this very moment. So, Matt, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on the live stream. And just in general, I think we hear a lot of things, as we're sitting here consuming on Twitter and on the television box. And, the general kind of view that I get is this isn't a great draft. I mean, maybe not as great as other drafts. Disabuse me of that notion or confirm that belief, if you will, sir.
It's a complicated draft. I think that's probably the best way to put it, and in the sense that it doesn't have guys like Jamar Chase in it, or the quarterbacks who are considered blue chip quarterbacks. And when those two elements are missing, when you have either just some top, instant impact, and I mean when I say instant impact, like high impact Pro Bowl caliber skill players, plus quarterbacks who you would call franchise quarterbacks that teams feel really strongly about that they would draft in the top 5 without any type of angst, generally the class is going to be considered a lesser group. But at the same time, as a fantasy player, if you're a fantasy player and you aren't one who trades much, or you're not, that's not the strength of your game, there are still enough players at running back, wide receiver, and even tight end that are worth your time to take, both in dynasty leagues, and you're going to find also probably by August in the late rounds. If you're in a 20 player or 20 roster draft, then probably after round 15, you're probably going to be taking a couple of these guys, just like you do most years, and there may be a couple who sneak into that 10th round. Inside of that 10th round, because they may start right away. There's a couple of running backs like that. So this class remains a viable group for fantasy players to build rosters with. It's just not an all-star class. And there's a lot of boom-bust talent due to injuries and due to maybe certain size requirements, or the fact, like with this running back class, where there's a lot of good talent. It may be a deeper class than I've seen last year, but the demand for the position in the NFL is weak enough this year that a lot of these guys may get lost in the shuffle for a year or two, until either there's some turnover with coaching staffs, injuries, suspensions, retirements, things like that.
Yeah, I feel like we've been seeing, we're all looking for the big name wide receiver to emerge, and I'll remind everyone, I mean, just because we've had some each year that have truly excelled. Last year, we kind of expected it of Jamar Chase. I don't know that we expected it. Certainly, the Philadelphia Eagles didn't expect it of Justin Jefferson selecting, Jalen Reagor just ahead of him. So, as far as dynasty players go, receivers tend to be gold, right? I mean, look, we're going to draft the running backs. That's an easier play. But we're looking for those wide receivers that are going to turn into something. I think this year's class, just based on my initial glance, seems to be a knot of guys kind of at the top. It's kind of like choose the flavor you like. And if that's the case, maybe versatility matters to you. What are you looking for in this group at the top? And if you want to go ahead and throw out that handful of names, that's fine as well.
Sure. And a lot of it is because wide receiver is that position where there's really 4 to 5 sub positions in it, with split end, flanker, slot, and then the combinations of players who are kind of what I call slot hybrids, whether it's a Juju Smith-Schuster type who plays big slot and maybe occasionally the flanker, or some guys who play split end and then a little bit of slot, or even slot and running back. The way teams in the NFL value wide receiver, the variation in grades based on those elements and needs makes that position have a wider variance of grade than any other position in the NFL, which means there are players who can have a second round value with some teams, and at a 7th round value with others. And I think that's something that fans may sometimes not realize. And so with this class, you have guys who fit all within those realms, which is why you're going to find that there's some players that may be 5th, 6th, 7th, or even 10th on some pre-draft boards, who will get drafted as the third or fourth or maybe even the second receiver in the NFL draft because of that fit. So some of the guys who are in that mix, certainly Drake London, who just had his pro day, who's a bigger receiver who gets separation in ways other than just straight vertical speed, who can play inside in that kind of big receiver role, but also play outside a lot like maybe T. Higgins. So you've got a player like that. Jamison Williams, who isn't even going to play much of this year because he suffered that ACL injury in the national championship game. He might have been the top receiver on the board for a lot of teams and may still be for those that look at him as, listen, we'll take the redshirt year. We want the talent because he's a massive speedster who also has special team skill, not only as a return specialist, but he plays tough in terms of being able to block punts and work on coverage teams. He's done that throughout his career too. So you have a player that they feel like could become a complete receiver with high-end speed in a lot of ways of maybe a Jalen Waddle type. But again, he's a smaller player with that ACL injury. And if you think of Deshaun Jackson, a player who's probably, if you count up the number of wide receiver one seasons that wide receivers have had in fantasy over the past 15, 16 years, you'd find Deshaun Jackson near the top of the list in the top 3 to 4. But of course, the joke is that he accumulates those wide receiver one values in about 2/3 of a season, and then is on the shelf for much of the time. So there's some concerns about size for some teams with Williams. Then you have the all-around guys like Chris Olave, who I think is the best route runner in this class, and honestly the best receiver on the board. Who I probably can play all three of the main positions that you would put a receiver at. So he can be quite versatile for you. He's a tough player who can win after the catch. He may not be as marquee of a name as a guy like Garrett Wilson, who is also considered one of the top receivers in the class. But I would say where Garrett Wilson has more Marquise Lee in him in terms of a high-end athlete who wants to make dynamic moves and dynamic plays, but sometimes there's details from this game that has lapses or is missing. Olave is much more the Robert Woods to Garrett Wilson's Marquise Lee, but both of them are better athletes, in my opinion, than Woods and Lee. So you get a lot of love there. And then and the last guy I'll talk about is Treylon Burks, who a lot of people love his game based on the fact that you see the size and some of the speed that he showed against Alabama, at least in the open field. But if you take a closer look at his game, you realize that he's very much a fit-based athlete right now who is still developing the tools for the game. The tools are there, but the blueprint is not, especially against press coverage. So when you look at a guy like Burks, is he really the next Deebo Samuel? I don't think there is a next Deebo Samuel. He might get the shot to be on a team that supports some of the things that Deebo Samuel did, but he won't have Trent Williams, Kyle Juszczyk, and George Kittle setting the edge for him. And I think he's more of a Kenny Galladay type of player, which can still be top 15 fantasy production and caliber if you put him on the inside and have receivers the caliber of Marvin Jones and Golden Tate in Detroit. If you put him outside like they did with New York and make him be the man, the primary guy against top corners, and you don't have a top quarterback the way the New York Giants have Daniel Jones, who's a kind of a struggling starter in many respects, then you're probably going to get the Kenny Galladay you see in New York. So there's some boom bust attached to that as well, and on down through the rankings.
Right. So it seems, to me like, as we're looking at these guys, you're trying to project it. In the early part, you're not trying to project, landing spot, right? You don't have to. You're just assessing the skills, laying them out there. Again, highly recommend everyone check out Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio at mattwaldmanrsp.com. But I want to talk about a couple of these guys. So I'm in a dynasty draft that drafts before the draft, and so it's kind of crazy. And so I tend to look for maybe a little versatility. So you talked about some of these receivers that play multiple spots. Let's talk about Drake London. By the way, check out everybody's work here at the site, footballdiehards.com, including all our rookie content from John Lobb. He's fantastic. He's in the chat right now. If you want to ask him questions, ask questions. If you want to ask Matt questions, put them in there, and I'll get them out to Matt in time, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. We do this every Saturday, noon Eastern time, and we're going to start bringing in some mock drafts during the week in the evenings to get all of you involved and engaged a little bit more. So we'll have a good time. But Drake London, right? So you look at him and has the versatility. He can play inside, a ginormous slot or not. I look for a couple things, right? As I'm looking at players, size and speed. We know he has half of that. He's big. We don't know how fast he is. He didn't run his 40. And he's coming off an injury. And so it's understandable he didn't want to run. I'm not going to put a big ding on him. Clearly he was productive. But his productivity last year, I was 8 games. He had 1,000 yards on 8 games. You dig a little deeper. So, my first question is, how do we know this wasn't a guy just on a great heater or just didn't hit a nice stretch of opposition, whatever, So tell us a little bit about what you're looking for when you see these kind of players that maybe had a little limited production at the last we saw them.
Really, I look at multiple years of their film. So when I went back and watched London, in the years prior, I was impressed with what I saw. You're looking at the technical skills with his game. He's someone who understands how to set up breaks. He understands how to execute breaks and can technically do it with routes that come back to the quarterback. So even though he's not, a burner, he's someone that runs good enough routes that he can earn separation against defensive backs on routes on the perimeter, breaking back to the quarterback, which means that defensive backs have to respect his ability to separate downfield, not only for that he has decent enough acceleration to get on top of a defensive back early, and that's the more important thing than deep straight line speed. Because once you can get downhill of a defensive back within the first 10 yards, and then you can use your body to stack them to get in front of them, you control the pace of the route, and you force the defensive back to have to play through you. So Drake London does that very well. And also there's the separation that comes at the end of the trail end of the route, where if you're in a vertical route where you break more towards the sideline late, so you earn some horizontal separation. And there's the above the rim separation of just, being able to jump and use your height. And those are things that London does well too. And so you have all of that. You look at the hands, the ability to adjust to the football, the physicality. He has great timing. He's graceful. He's tough. And while he's not going to run away from the 32 fastest cornerbacks in the NFL in a 40-yard dash. But, I think of speedsters like, Marquise Brown, Henry Ruggs, John Ross, Corey Coleman, Will Fuller. These guys all went before players like Michael Thomas, Juju Smith-Schuster, Mike Williams, Cooper Kupp, Christian Kirk, Cortland Sutton, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and T. Higgins. So, the teams that pick the limited speedster with a limited game are the same teams that are usually at the top of the board in the NFL at the end of April once again, because they're looking for speed. They're looking for speed at the expense of other skills. And it's really about acceleration, route running, and being able to catch the football. And those are qualities that Drake London has in abundance.
So, as I look at the rookie scouting portfolio, the ranking tables, the wide receiver ranking tables, you mentioned you have Olave at the top. A lot of people have Garrett Wilson at the top and think he's the top guy. Talk about the difference between these two teammates and how much will landing spot for them matter, and how much might that shift your opinion of them?
Well, Garrett Wilson isn't that far away from being in my top tier. I have 3 receivers in my top tier. Garrett Wilson's forehead is bumping on the ceiling of the 4 as being the 4th one, but he's at the top of the 2nd tier. And the difference to me is the details of the game. Wilson has some technical issues that he has to overcome. One is that he has a problem with clapping onto the football. When you think about throwing a football to to a young kid or grandkid or a young kid in your family who's still learning how to catch, and he or she claps onto the ball with either side of, on either side of the ball, and they usually miss it, bounces off their forehead or chest, and depending on the how soft the ball is, they're either giggle and laugh or they're crying, and basically this is an issue where when you extend your arms for the ball, your hands need to be together when you catch it so that you're meeting the ball with your hands together as opposed to trying to clap your hands onto it. Because as a result of that, now you've made it much more difficult and you're more likely to use the palm of your hands to hit the ball. And try throwing a football up against a wall and see how wildly it bounces off. The rebound is quite violent and wild, as opposed to as if you catch it with your fingertips and you have allow the 10 fingertips to how specifically engineered and nuanced they are to be able to slow the spin of the ball. And if you don't catch it right away, the bounce or rebound from it is going to be softer and easier to control. And Wilson tends to clap onto it. A lot of young receivers do this. It's not a fatal flaw unless they don't correct it over the span of, the first year or two. And I've seen Wilson make good catches without clapping, so I think the promise is there. But it is going to detract from him making those elite plays in tight coverage where it's a, kind of a must-win, vital situation. The highlight caliber plays he makes now, but he gets away with it because maybe, the Michigan corner he faced is dumbfounded and unlikely to be an NFL caliber player compared to, even the lowest caliber starting corner who, when Wilson does the math and he looks like he's doing math catching the ball, he's holding on to it and go, wow, I got the right answer. And then the defender knocks it out and says, no, you don't, because the catching and retracting needs work. The other thing, too, with Wilson that needs work is his work against press coverage. A lot of people talk about him as being so great of a route runner because they look at the playground style moves, the dynamic athletic movements at the beginning of the route where he makes some very quick cuts and being able to make the wide lateral changes of direction. And that's all good. That's helpful. But you also have to be efficient and you have to be good at beating patient and physical cornerbacks. And just like Devonta Smith with the Eagles, who had a pretty darn good fantasy season for a rookie. 900 yards is nothing to sneeze at. Smith still didn't elevate his game to the level of a Jalen Waddle or a Jamar Chase because he didn't have the ability to win against patient physical corners who wait for those moves, those dynamic moves, and say, whatever, I know where you're going. I know what the route's likely to be. You're going to have to suspend my disbelief about what you're doing a little better than what you have. And they pin him to the boundary. And I've noticed that with Wilson, while the frequency is much less for the college game, when you see him against patient physical cornerbacks, he gets locked up more often. So again, he's going to have to refine that area of his game. And the third thing with him that needs work is like Marquise Lee, he doesn't see when, on a 3rd and 7 opportunity, he can catch a ball for 5 yards downfield. And he'll have a hole right in front of him to turn upfield and get another easy 3 to 4, get the first down. And a lot of those opportunities he likes to ignore because he loves the possibility of bouncing the play sideline to sideline, trying to get a 70-yard gain, but runs towards pursuit that has an angle on him and ends up losing yards and not getting the first down in those situations when he could have just taken the easy yards. And that's a common problem with guys who think they can out-athlete people and tend to work with these wild moves. So he's still a guy that, where he lands, he can be a starter, probably give you between 700 and 800 yards right away, even if those issues pop up and he doesn't improve them. But that's different than a guy like Chris Olave, who I think if he goes to the right team as well, he can land in there. And I think, for him, he could be a 1,000, 1,100 yard or 1,200 yard receiver if he gets paired with an Aaron Rodgers or a top quarterback where they need a starter and he can be moved around the formation. Whereas with Garrett Wilson, I think if he goes with Aaron Rodgers, he has slightly lower upside, at least immediately.
All right, we're talking to Matt Waldman here, author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Check out all his work. Follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Also, so had a question from the YouTube room, Scott Kobe, interested in finding out, some of the receivers outside that top group. And so I'll just throw out a couple names at you. And one that I'm hearing more as we get into this process. We're hearing Justin Ross, Christian Watson. I'm hearing Jalen Tolbert because I did an interview with him and he really came off well. And I think he's impressed some people. But Alec Pierce is a name that I'm hearing more and more as I talk to some of the local beat writers of various teams that have wide receiver needs, that maybe not as a super expensive play, maybe a second guy or a second round pick. What are your thoughts on him?
He's a terrific prospect, and I think that he's one of those players that could really surprise fantasy players this year with his contributions to a team. I mean, at 6'3", 211, and with the metrics he has just from the combine itself, they compare quite favorably to Justin Jefferson, another player I like coming out of LSU, and who was one of my top receivers in my rankings a couple of years ago or a few years ago. And the difference is that Pierce actually jumps higher than Justin Jefferson. Now, the skills are the difference here. Now, Justin Jefferson was a better route runner than Pierce is at this point. But on vertical plays, there's not a lot of difference. The speed, the ability to earn the position he needs to. There are a lot of guys who are tall, who are fast, who don't track the ball well. They jump too late. They wind up having to lean back and open up their chest and hands to the defender who would have been at their back. And Jefferson, Jamar Chase are very good at being able to earn that position with the early jump and jumping straight up and down. Alec Pierce is great at it. He has excellent hands. He's a physical blocker who can help out with off-ball linebackers. So you can put him inside or motion him into a twin set on one side and let him help block there, and then release on play action if they do play action looks. And he's believable in that respect because of his blocking ability. He's his route running is good, will get better, and I think where that comes in is the press release game will just have to become a little bit more varied. Some of his breaks can be a little bit deeper, but you can see that he's on his way. The foundation is there to build on. And, again, running after the catch, not quite as good as Jefferson, but I think that some of that is the quarterback play that he had in Cincinnati. I'm not a huge Desmond Ridder fan myself, but I know he's getting a lot of love. But I think Jefferson can be exploited to be even better as a runner. So his all-around game, like at worst, I think that he'll come in and give you, an approximation of what Marquez Callaway did last year when he was healthy in New Orleans. And then I think at best he puts it together faster, and he gives you play that statistically may not be up there with Justin Jefferson, but you can see shades of that, and he could become an 800 to 1,000 yard contributor within the first year or two, and then build from there.
All right, that's excellent stuff there. And also, John and Scott are talking in the chat about a little bit about Treylon Burke. Just a quick impression on him, just in general. Where do you see him at?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are saying Debo and Cordero Patterson. I'm saying more somewhere between Matt Collins and Kenny Golladay, which is a lot lower for a lot of people, or even Brian Quick-like. And the reasons are, he can go up and win the ball. That's fine. He has some lapses with positioning and using his hands sometimes in the position that he should, which is going to get him in trouble in the NFL where, even the smallest defenders say, listen, man, I used to cover guys who were closer to Calvin Johnson in ability, and I was, a foot shorter than they were, or close to it, it seemed like, and still was able to get the job done sometimes. They're not going to be impressed by his size and weight. The other thing is when defenses say, put themselves in off coverage and place themselves in the break path of Burks doesn't seem to have any finesse and understanding of how to use his feet and hands to win that, and he gets hung up trying to run people over, and quarterbacks have to go away from him even when he's the first read. And when it's a design type of RPO situation or a schemed up play where he's really the only target that they're expecting to get open, and the coverage is placed in a way where you should expect the receiver to earn space and he can't, that gets quarterbacks sacked. It forced them to have to scramble unnecessarily. And so Burks to me has the potential to become a good starter, and I think with the right team, with the receivers around him and a good quarterback, he can give you maybe low-end wide receiver 2 or high-end wide receiver 3 production this year or maybe next. But I don't see him being the dominant player that people were talking about. I don't logo scout very much, but I'd say that Arkansas has historically been an offense that likes to scheme up athletes, but necessarily doesn't have great position players. And that goes as far back as Darren McFadden and Felix Jones, and is as recent as guys like Raheem Boyd, who was highly touted coming into his final season. And then you saw the holes, and when people started to really look at his game up close, and he was an undrafted free agent. It's just the nature of the beast with college football sometimes.
Yeah, Pedro Resto in the chat was asking, which of these guys, the top threes need work on various flaws, and are any of them taking as a wide receiver 3 in PPR leagues? I'm going to suggest, Pedro, you wait until you get landing spots on these guys. If you're not playing Dynasty, or, opportunities are going to matter, I think, for the most part. And, right now, if you're drafting in best balls, they're so cheap, you could take flyers on any of these guys. So that's fair. Matt, let's get into the running backs, and we'll touch on the quarterbacks here. I don't think anyone's really enthusiastic about that group other than, Dynasty Superflex, and maybe some of you are out there listening to them. One more time, if you like what you're hearing here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, all those stupid things you do on YouTube to make the algorithm happy, because the algorithm is what we're here to please, and you, if you're listening. So running backs are the things we love, right? I mean, the running backs from a fantasy perspective are what we're after, and it just seems like, there's one name pretty much locked in the top, man, and that's Breece Hall. Is that the case for you as well? How much is there a lot of separation between him and Kenneth Walker and the guys who come up behind him?
I'd say Hall and Walker, there's very little separation. It's just that Hall fits all the characteristics that are going to get NFL teams on board of drafting him, as someone that they would have given a first round grade to, but will wait till the early or mid second to get. And Hall, and a lot of it is because Hall has that height and weight factor. And so when you got a guy who's at least 5'10" and at least 215, and then has his speed and his burst, the acceleration is really the big deal there. And the fact that he has that top acceleration, teams are going to like that. And on top of that, he can, he's a good tackle breaker. I think he and Walker aren't that different in terms of breaking tackles, not that different in terms of acceleration, but Hall's is just maybe slightly better. The difference probably between the two in skills is that I think Walker is a little better is definitely better as a pass protector. I think both will get to where they need to be to contribute in that arena, but I think Walker's a little bit ahead conceptually and technically and in effort. I think Hall's a little more like Jonathan Taylor was, which was, smart enough to be the artful dodger where it looked like he made the effort on film. But if you take a close enough look and nitpick it, you'd say, yeah, you're saving yourself for Sunday. But Hall has that big playability. The hands are pretty good, should get better if he works on technique. But he reminds me a lot of guys like Matt. It's like he's kind of split. He has that smooth striding Matt Forte, Robert Smith kind of thing, if you remember Robert Smith, and even for some of you, if you remember Matt Forte, because I know, us in the fantasy industry sometimes have memories of about 3 years with players. But LaShawn McCoy at his peak is another guy who, while not a smooth strider like those guys, he can make cuts like McCoy. He can be very sudden with his stop-start, his creativity, very dynamic, very quick, and imaginative. But he also breaks tackles well like Forte or Smith. So big fan of Hall. With Walker. Walker reminds me of J.K. Dobbins and way back when Ray Rice. Short but not small, ultra quick, very good between the tackles, a very good tight crease runner, very patient. So he's a little more versatile in terms of the type of blocking schemes you can use. Like, to me, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would be wise to draft Kenneth Walker, because they run a lot of duo, which is a pair of double teams in the middle of the field with the guards and center, and they're usually tight creases that you have to work through. And Walker would be a more dynamic runner for that than a guy like Hall, though I think Hall can learn to do it. Walker would be the one that would fit there. While the pass receiving is something that people always have questions about, I've always graded players, even like Melvin Gordon or Leonard Fournette, who've proven that they can catch the ball. It's not about volume, folks. When it comes to that, it's about the technique and hand-eye coordination. And do they run the routes that they run in the college game? Do they run them well enough? And all those things, Hall and Walker show, even if the volume wasn't there for them.
So, just in general, something you mentioned is something that we hear all the time is pass protection, and we see it literally with our eyes. We invest in players, and we wonder why they're not on the films or not on the field as much as we expected. And a lot of time, it is pass protection. How closely, just as a general, this group at the top, how do they fare in that regard?
Um, I think that the best pass protector on my board, probably among my top 5 to 7 backs, is probably Brian Robinson Jr., who probably won't even be a third round pick. I mean, I think he has the skills to be that and to be a starter in the league. But he's someone that understands. With pass protection, you have the ability to diagnose, and certainly in the NFL is going to be more complex in terms of the types of blitzes they throw, and the type at the running back and the disguises, and then the types of calls that the line and back have to be on the same page with. So a lot of these guys are going to struggle at the upper end of the diagnostic scale with pass protection, but Robinson and Zamir White are pretty good at it. And then after that, it's about, do they earn the right position so that they can actually deliver with their hands and not overextend, leaning in with their body and their pads, where when they get hit, they automatically get knocked back and they're not meeting contact with their hands. You want to see them deliver with a good punch, because even if you can't knock a defender backwards because they're your size or 20 pounds or 40 pounds heavier and running downhill, you need to be able to at least slow their momentum. And when you strike first, you control the interaction enough to be able to do that. And so some of these guys have the potential to do that. Walker earns good position. I think Robinson does that very well, and he's a big enough dude that he can handle the larger linebackers and even some defensive ends. White plays like he's 20 pounds heavier than he is. So some of these guys, it's there for the taking, but most of the time, NFL teams know that they're not going to these rookie running backs aren't going to be Edgerrin James way back in the day and handle every facet of pass protection like they're a 10-year pro. They're going to look to use them on the backside of design plays, helping out with a tight end or a tackle where they don't have to do a ton of work on the inside. And when they do it on the inside, it's going to be straightforward types of blitzes with a linebacker coming through where you should be able to get square and punch. Any other type of work beyond that, they're going to leave it to more of a pass protection specialist on their depth chart who's a veteran.
Yeah, it's to me a fascinating aspect that we watch some of these players on as they go into their pro career. We have these expectations based on their production, and you're wondering, why is this man not on the field all the time? I think a lot of times that's what we see. Look at a couple of off-schedule guys. So the popular names that I'm hearing: James Cook, Dalvin's brother, maybe just because he's Dalvin's brother, right? And Damian Pierce is the name I hear a lot. You're not as keen on them as some others. Give me, throw me out why, but also give me some of the off-schedule guys you think you're going to have an eye on, and as you're preparing for deeper leagues.
Sure. I mean, I like James Cook enough as a contributor. So to me, that's a guy who will give you that. Let's say like Nyheim Hines is a perfect example of a good contributor who has a very similar build and type of game as Cook. And when you put Nyheim Hines in the game, if you're a fantasy guy, he's going to get you production. It's just the fact that no team's going to want to ride him as their starter. And for good reason. I mean, he's just not a powerful back. He's not a guy that they're going to feel can hold up between the tackles and earn 15 to 20 touches in that, where, 2/3 of them are going to be inside, in the box. So with Cook, I think he has more skills than Hines as a inside runner. He's very good in terms of decision making, spotting penetration, and finding ways to get downhill quickly. So from these aspects, he's excellent between the tackles. And at 5'11", 190, it's not like he's too small to work between the tackles. I mean, Terrell Davis began his career at 190. I don't think Cook, though, is going to build up to 220. At the same time, he's not Chris Johnson either. He's not that rugged, and I don't think he's as explosive as Chris Johnson. He's smooth he has a smooth high-end acceleration, but the top-end speed isn't Chris Johnson-like. and the ruggedness in terms of being able to finish with pad level and bounce off hits to the degree that Johnson isn't really there. So he's somewhere with Hines on the low end, Johnson at the unattainable top end, but the one where you'd see shades of it. He's a decent scat back candidate who can give you contributor production, maybe in kind of like the the Pollard role to Ezekiel Elliott, but whereas teams like Dallas fans think that Pollard can someday be a starter, I think that you will see that Cook is a little more limited in that respect. Pierce is another one like that, just in a different dimension. You can use the Dallas comparison again and say he's a little more Marion Barber in the sense that, yeah, if you need him to be the starter, a team can roll with him, and he might give you between 900 to 1,100 yards with enough touches, and then have a high-end receiving game. He's probably one of the better receivers in this class at the running back position, much like Cook. And this is why there's fantasy appeal and a lot of talk about him, is that it's like they can catch the football. They know that they've gotten a lot of looks, and so therefore they think about spread offenses, and like they think about Austin Eckler's and Christian McCaffrey's and Alvin Kamara, and think that's where these guys are going. But Dameon Pierce isn't that quick, isn't that fast, isn't that skilled as a tackle breaker. He's good at all of those things. I mean, Marion Barber was very good at all those things, but he's not Marshawn Lynch in my opinion. I don't think we're looking in that direction with him. He can start if you need him to, but you're more likely using him as a committee back and a guy that, like, say, Jordan Howard, but with more, a little quicker and a little more athletic. He can start if you need him, but you're going to be looking somewhere else down the line. So guys that I do think – go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's we're
okay. Yeah. Guys that I do think fit in this role, who you might be able to get later, are Keontae Ingram out of USC, former 4-star Texas running back, who is highly underrated in this class. He catches the ball well. He has that short area quickness, the creativity, and the physical tackle breaking and contact balance skills. He's versatile with the running schemes that you're looking for to put him into. He can run pretty much all the types of schemes that you're going to see in the NFL. And he reminds me, at worst, of a healthier, more durable version of Chris Ivory, who was a starter in this league and performed well when he could stay on. At best, I think he's closer to a Kareem Hunt. I don't think he's quite Kareem Hunt-like, but we might find out, within a year or two that he's closer to that than he is Ivory. So that's a guy who could start for you, because Kareem Hunt, to me, is still a top 5 to top 10 running back in this league, despite the fact that he's, second to the best running back on, in the NFL right now. But another guy who, is Jerome Ford, Isaiah Pacheco, Kevin Harris, Zonovan Knight, even late, are interesting backs. Abram Smith, you put him in an outside zone, former linebacker. He's kind of a savant when it comes to his outside zone. He looks like a 5-year veteran in the NFL running outside zone. He has 2 ACL tears, and you watch him, that cut the way that he does, and he's more like, Dalvin Cook in the way that he doesn't really cut well, but he has the movement skills to compensate for that some. And then I'll add Kennedy Brooks to the equation, who had a better combine and better metrics than people expected from him, but still is more like committee level in that sense athletically. But what he has to overcome or compensate for that is unbelievable vision, great contact balance, excellent movement skills, probably the best vision in this class next to Kenneth Walker. And it's not like he's slow or lacking burst like Devin Singletary, or even lacking size like Devin Singletary. So if you tell me he's a notch above Devin Singletary, then you're looking at a guy who, if he gets the right opportunity, could be a 1,200, 1,300 yard back and really shock people that way. I could probably name another 5 guys who fit into this area that are just as appealing as Cook or Dameon Pierce, and give you details about them. So that's why this class is rich.
And this is why you should be looking at the rookie scouting portfolio like I am right now out of the corner of my eye, as you all see me doing this. Matt, Scott Kobe wanted to know, do we see any J.D. McKissick style backs in this offense? And obviously we're looking for those productive receiving backs that can come in and, give us that high, at least a solid floor, right, in PPR leagues.
Well, James Cook right away will be that, plus a little bit more. Jerron Ely, I like him as much as Cook, if not a little bit more in that respect too. Later in the draft, you should keep an eye on Ronnie Rivers if you're in a deeper league. He's a Jalen Richard type of player, or a Deion Lewis maybe type of player if everything works out well. He's got great burst, excellent hands, runs routes out of the slot that you would look at an Austin Eckler type. And then a surprising player who I think has more Austin Eckler than people are realizing is Tyler Goodson out of Iowa, who runs excellent routes, good hands, and can run between the tackles. And at Iowa, he was asked not to make cutbacks because of the way the scheme was set up and the way the coaches like to coach that scheme. And he's a natural cutback runner, so they really kind of hamstrung him. Tyler Beatty also can give you a little bit of that because he is fast. He's a good straight line runner. He catches the ball reasonably well. And then there's some bigger backs who, again, like the Marion Barber comp with Damian Pierce, Zonovan Knight runs terrific routes for a guy that people call Bam. And he has very good hands. Quandre White, if I were a skilled running back coach, I would be looking, I might be paying to make my mark with Zonovan White. I'd probably pay him to train him because I think once he figures out some of the conceptual skills, his receiving acumen and his ability to move, there's a lot of Kenyon Drake to his game that could be even more refined than Drake. And then Isaiah Pacheco has excellent hand-eye coordination. I think he's closer to Cam Akers than people realize. He may not get there with the fit and where he goes, but skill-wise, he's not far away. High-end speed. At Rutgers, they just didn't have a great line. He often had to take chances or try and attack downhill before his block's set up because, when you have to look at your watch to see if your guard can pull around the center, you're going to get planted in the backfield. And so he understood that. So those are guys that are very skilled in that respect. Maybe even a Raheem Blackshear out of Virginia Tech is kind of a sneaky good player too.
All right, so I mentioned quarterback's not an exciting class, tight end as well. And so we're going to forego those. I'm going to throw Matt some sabotage questions that he wasn't expecting because I know everyone loves those. Nothing better than that. Not really sabotage questions, but I wanted to, go back and revisit some of last year's top rookies that maybe didn't quite get done what we thought, or maybe they did. And I just want to get your take on what they did versus your expectations, Matt. And Trevor Lawrence, we'll start there. I mean, I don't think anyone didn't think he's everything he was advertised, but man, what a horrible circumstance. How keen are you on a rebound for Trevor Lawrence this year with what we expect to be a competent staff?
If you can find someone in your league who just soured on Trevor Lawrence, and you can get him at a discount, I would look at him as think of some of the top quarterbacks, maybe not Joe Burrow, but think of some quarterbacks who've had steady, even kind of development trajectories, like say a Matt Stafford, who would give you low-end quarterback one production every year, but you could draft him like around rounds 9 to 12 in redraft leagues every year. And you think about, but then that when he had the right talent around him, he could give you top 5 production in peak years. Trevor Lawrence is that kind of player. And you got to look at the Jaguars as kind of like the Detroit Lions in that respect. So if you can get him at a deal, you got to take this guy. I mean, he didn't disappoint to me. There's just 2 words you can say: Urban Meyer.
Yeah, I think that is true. A player we did not see anything of, and I'm starting to wonder if we will this year, the way that things are heading. And I'm talking about San Francisco's Trey Lance. Where were you at on him last year, Matt? Where are you at on him this year?
I was high on him as my second-ranked quarterback, and I love the fact that he got to have some intermittent use last year, because to me, that's the ideal way to develop a quarterback. The last quarterback I saw get that kind of intermittent use was Steve McNair But that was by design. Lance, it was due to injury to Garoppolo. But I think by this by the end of the summer, we're going to see that Trey Lance will be the starter and Garoppolo will be in another town. But I think it's just going to take some time for that to happen. Even if it doesn't, I would still be buying into Trey Lance because he's a young player. He played in a West Coast offense. He was, the issue wasn't the complexity of the offense. The issue was the experience level. He had really one season in a game, and that experience level takes some time. And this is a contending team. The 49ers see themselves as a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, as you've got a quarterback in there that's winning 70% of his starts, and you're a team that's built to win now, that always seemed like a likely outcome. And I think Garoppolo would already be gone were it not for the shoulder surgery. I think the Colts may have nibbled on him, or maybe one of those other teams. So that is a fact. And just Pedro Resto had asked me a question, so I'm going to get it real quick. I'm not going to panic about Deebo Samuel yet, Pedro, and let's all leave him alone on the social media, please. But he's looking to get paid. They may well pay him. I think he wants to get paid a lot. He said he wants to be paid like more than the best wide receiver because he plays a multi-dimensional role, and they'll get that figured out. As I mentioned at the top of the program with Kyler Murray, the public portion of negotiations are always the more contentious. There's usually work being done behind that's much more reasonable. So don't panic yet. I'm still drafting him. Really best honest, I'm not eagerly paying that because I think it's going to be hard for him to duplicate exactly what he was doing last year, or I'm not 100% convinced he will. So there's that. Anyhow, a couple other guys, Matt, before we get you out of here. I'm taking up your entire Saturday, and I know you love talking football, so it's not that horrible. But I don't want to keep you all day. But some other guys, Javonte Williams, what you saw of him in a 50-50 timeshare, do you believe? I've heard people argue that he runs with so much violence that maybe he's better off in a timeshare. Please tell me that's not the case.
Yeah, that's not the case. Running with violence is a good thing. Jamel Charles ran with violence. Adrian Peterson ran with violence. Ray Rice ran with violence. There are a lot of players who had multiple 1,000-yard seasons and long careers because the best football players are aggressive football players who accelerate into contact and attack the defender first, even if they use that attacking technique not to run over the guy, but like Jamel Charles, to use it to set up a move after they make the first contact. And that's the type of thing that you want from a back. He's to me, he's a higher end version of Mark Ingram, who, can have, and Ingram had a long career. Even at the beginning of his career, he had a lot of little injuries and a slow start, but then came on and gave you strong running back 2, some running back 1 seasons. And I think that you can get that and maybe a little bit more from Javonte Williams. You certainly you want to buy into. And I'll add with Samuel, one thing that you did mention just real quick is that, what's going to be interesting about this is San Francisco is very much a system team. Their coach is a system guy. And system guys, especially West Coast system guys, are more like, I can plug in widgets into my team and I can get production out of them. So this is why you're seeing a lot of this contentious kind of thing, or you see why they have a lot of personnel problems where they draft guys and don't wind up not using them, then going with the lower end guys because there's one element of that player's game that works out really well, and then they kind of ride those guys that don't conform to the system as well into the ground and going for guys who may not be as talented overall but can express one area that they need them to be that widget. And I think that this is a question of Deebo saying, I'm multi-purpose, and them going, well, but you can't get off press coverage. Good luck doing that as well somewhere else where you're going to be used differently and don't have the system around you to exploit it. And you can see where hopefully they'll come together on this, but that's where the gulf might be.
Yeah, just one from the YouTube chat here, Matt. Justin Ross, you have rated highly. What is it that you see that maybe others don't?
I see that others look at draft capital. People who rank now usually rank by draft capital, which is where is he? That factors into what round is he going to be taken. And so when they start, it all kind of comes down from the NFL. They're following, media people, following scouts, following what GMs think, and that group think is Well, he's had a spinal fusion surgery, and no players ever come back from the surgery or played football after that kind of surgery, and he did. And the doctors have said he has no greater of a chance of getting paralyzed and having a catastrophic injury than any other player who's on the field. Okay, and he did that playing, and he came back playing hurt with a stress fracture, a Jones stress fracture along the bone on the outside of his foot. So a lot of teams are going to look at his 40 times and his combine and his injury and think that he's not what he was. Well, they thought the same dumb thing about Nick Chubb, to be honest with you, when he had a very difficult surgery on 3 ligaments on a knee and came back and looked like the same player. And I think the difference is that when you look at the skills on a granular level, they were the same. At worst, he's a Hakeem Nicks type of player in Nicks's prime who can win after win at the catch point, with physical play during the stem of the route. And he was playing hurt, where he's taken a Toradol shot since the Georgia game and played the entire year. By second half, that wearing off, it's going to affect your cutting. It's going to affect your ability to really explode in and out of breaks. And then he had to get surgery and had to spend 6 to 8 weeks immobilized, where he couldn't build on his explosion and route running and really game the system way these players do to run the 40 time and vertical leap at the combine. He had to start from a negative to work back to run a 4.56 and jump 31 inches. And when I talked to a very experienced scout with a biomechanics background, and also a heavy analytics background, and I just said, kind of ran that by him. I said, am I crazy to say that some teams might get him and say, wow, he's far more explosive than we thought, based on what we were seeing in the past year? And he's going to say, I'm surprised that Justin Ross was anywhere remotely healthy enough to even compete at the combine and to produce at the combine the way at his pro day, the way that he did. So yeah, I based more of my evaluation on the pre-injury tape, even though I looked at the post-injury just to see if to ensure that I'm seeing good enough techniques. And the techniques were there without the athletic ability due to the injury. Injury, he looked like one of the better wide receivers in this draft class, and that's why I've rated him high.
Interesting. I keep going back. I can remember that guy that ranked the Nick Chubb ahead of Saquon Barkley in the draft that year, and that was you. And that worked out. And so that's just to say the process does matter on many occasions, folks, and you can find more of that in the rookie scouting portfolio at Matt Waldman on Twitter, Matt Waldman RSP on the internet. So Scott Covey has this question for you, Matt. Who is the top rookie in this class from a fantasy perspective, regardless of position? We're going to say redraft. You want to say, if you want to shade that and say dynasty or redraft, however you want to do it.
While Breece Hall is the most talented and maybe the guy that I would put up there, Breece Hall and Chris Olave probably the two most talented, and I could see Olave being in that conversation. I'm going to go with Kenneth Walker. I just have a feeling he's going to wind up in a good situation, and he's going to wind up being the most talented. He's going to be the most productive this year.
Interesting. I like that one. All right. Well, I could do this all day, and I would love to have Matt do it all day, but I'm sure he has something else to get done, and we'll have him back.
The wife's angry, I think.
Alicia, please, just one more minute, please, while I get us out of here. So we'll have Matt back at some point. Again, if you followed Matt over the course of time, you know what he's all about. You can find his work in the Pro Forecast magazine as well, as you have annually since I can remember, and I've been doing this a while. So great stuff. The post-draft rookie scouting portfolio is also fantastic. And the dynasty component should not be overlooked. Go to mattwaldmanrsp.com. Find out more about all that. Follow Matt again on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Matt, thank you so much for the time, and I can't wait to do this again and dig into some other positions. Maybe post-draft actually have some helmets on these guys and know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, and thanks again, and thanks to everybody who was in the chat room, and shout out to John Lobb. Classes in session with him all the time.
Yes, it is. All right, everybody. There goes Matt Waldman. Appreciate his time. Just want to remind everyone, if you're listening to this on Saturday, if you're watching live, if you're watching the replay, you know I'm on Sirius all the time. If you're watching today, I'll be on Saturday, today, 5 to 7. Tomorrow, I'll be solo, 5 to 7 p.m. as well. Monday, you'll get a double dip of me. I'll be on Fantasy Dirt and Football Diehards, doing all the things we like to do. So plenty of me available coming up. Don't miss out. Go to the footballdiehards.com website. Find all the latest, more rookie information from John Lobb. And again, I want to thank our guest, Matt Waldman, the Rookie Scouting Portfolio author. Has done this for so long and is just such in-depth work. I highly recommend it. I get it every year, and I think you should too if you get a chance. And again, he will appear in the Pro Forecast, so get that too. It's fantastic as well. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. John Lobb will be here. Will be more rookie talk heading into the draft, and then we'll have some helmets on those guys and know what the heck's going on. Thanks, everybody.